Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Kari and today I am doing a book review on Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. This book is a memoir or an autobiography. It's nonfiction either way, even if I don't know specifically what to classify it as. It is by Trevor Noah, who is a well-known comedian from South Africa, and it talks about a lot of his experiences growing up in South Africa from the 80s until, he left. In the 80s, apartheid was still very much so legal and the system that South Africa was governed under. Apartheid was not disbanded until 1994, I think. Mandela was released in 1990 and the new constitution was ratified in 97. They did have an interim constitution that was ratified in 94, but that one only lasted until the official one came about in 97. There's a wonderful book by Mark Kende about the South African Constitution in comparison to several other constitutions, including the UK and the US. If you are at all interested in the laws of South Africa, and specifically the laws under the new constitution for the last 20 years, I do highly recommend that book. I'll leave a picture of it on the screen so you can see the title. Born a Crime starts when he is very young, and it has three distinct parts. I don't know necessarily what I would classify them as, but it is separated into three parts, and he goes back and forth between each part, starting when he's young and up until I think he's about 20, and then repeats it in each section. I did find that a little bit off-putting, simply because he didn't necessarily state we're going back to the beginning now and working our way forward with a different theme, which I think would have improved the book because it would have made it slightly less confusing. And as such a short book, it's a little bit difficult to be that confusing. But I did give this book a 4.5 out of 5 because I really enjoyed it outside of that. The writing style is incredibly easy to read and conversational, which makes sense since he is a comedian. I also wish there had been a little bit more about how he had become a comedian. He starts as a DJ in one of the townships there outside of Johannesburg where he grew up, and I think that probably obviously started him on the path, but it would have been nice to have a little bit more context between I was a DJ in South Africa, look at me, I'm a comedian in the States now. But again, I'm being a little bit nitpicky. My favorite part about this book was bringing home the laws that I've read about. I have been to South Africa and studied the laws there, I have studied their constitution, but studying a constitution and their laws and their cases does not necessarily mean it's personal or even remotely real to you. I have also read Mandela's biography, which I highly recommend as well, for a good glimpse at what apartheid and the politics of the time were. But this book really drove it home that as a colored person, somebody of mixed descent, white and black, white and Malay, whatever, it was very difficult to live in South Africa during this time. Apartheid was South Africa's version of a caste system, and enforced about as strictly. They had townships for the black people, and they are still there because South Africa is struggling to come to terms with and fix the problems of apartheid. Apartheid was around for many, many decades, and so in the last 20 years they've started that road to recovery, but it's a long road. I think Noah did a really fantastic job of showing where apartheid came from and what it meant to people who lived either in the townships where he spent a lot of his childhood or in the suburbs where he also spent a lot of his childhood, in an effort to hide themselves or better themselves when legally they weren't supposed to be able to do that. For example, his mom taught herself to type through a typing course, and that's the only reason they weren't in the townships. But he was also colored, and so he discusses quite often not feeling like he belonged anywhere. In the suburbs, it was colored people or Malays, and in the townships, it was very much so black people. And even in his own family, it was very difficult because he was seen as white in his own family, because he wasn't as dark as they were. And I think it's a really interesting discussion because to me he looks black, but I'm also the color of milk. So there's that. But to somebody who is not the color of milk, he looks white. And I think he did a phenomenal job of pushing that on you without beating you over the head with it. It just made so much more sense. All the laws that I've read or read about affected him, even in the 80s and 90s. And he did it in such a almost self-deprecating way that it didn't feel hard to read. I read this in 1 or 2 sittings. I think probably because I was tired, but it's a very fast read with great humor and some fantastic lines. For example, racism is stupid, so it can be tricked. That was one of my favorite lines, and he gives examples of that afterwards, and I loved that he could do that. Don't really know how to explain this book, which is why I'm having problems filming this review. Basically, this book is fantastic, and it really emphasizes and shows how apartheid affected people who were neither white nor black. Black people were absolutely oppressed. They were, I think, 90% or more of the population, and even today they own roughly 10% of the land. The white minority owns the rest, and that is a result of apartheid, which they're trying to solve without becoming Zimbabwe and that whole land grab. But it was funny, and there are so many cultural references and cultural explanations, and it was fascinating to see somebody raised in a completely different culture and why that would change how he saw things or how somebody else did. Names, for instance, are a big thing in this book, and he explains that they name you for what they want you to be. If they want you to be somebody in power, then they name you after somebody in power, and that is a huge thing. He also talked about how Hitler is not a big villain to the South Africans. If they could go back and kill somebody, they would kill Cecil Rhodes, which I'm not entirely sure I personally would kill Cecil Rhodes because he didn't come until the 1800s. I would maybe kill the Dutch who arrived there in 1652 and then just continue killing them, but I do understand the animosity towards Cecil Rhodes because he's the one who founded Rhodesia, and he found the gold and the diamonds in the 1880s, and that created a entire system of institutionalized oppression against anybody who wasn't white so that they could separate black families and keep the men working in the mines for pennies a day, which was not going to keep anybody alive, let alone a family. I'm a little bitter, but this book is just amazing, and I highly recommend you read it. If you are at all interested in South Africa, I also recommend the Mark Kende book, which is all law. It is cases and statutes. The Covenant by James Michener, which is a fictional book covering from the early empires, I guess, of South Africa all the way up until 1880 something. And also Mandela's autobiography. They are all fantastic books, however, none of them quite drives it home that this was still a problem, is still a problem like this book, and so I highly recommend it. Even if this review is a little bit scrambled, I apologize. If you read this and all of those books, or even just one of those books, I think you'll get a really good feel for South Africa and what they're going through, and why all of these things actually matter. I hope that made sense. I think my Goodreads review is a little bit clearer because I wrote it pretty much directly after reading the book, so I'll leave that link down below if you want to check it out. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!